Hello and welcome to the Winners Find a Way show. I am your host, Trent Clark. Thrilled to be here as we enter into the episodes of the 140s. Got a special returning guest with me today, Marty Strong. How are you doing, Marty?
I'm doing good, Trent.
Yeah, excited to have you here. For those who don't know, I am the CEO of Leadershipity, a serial entrepreneur, international speaker, having spoken over 17 countries. Just released a book in August, Leading Winning Teams. Super excited about tomorrow, November 12th. We are doing a special Veterans Day today, recording with Marty. You'll find out why. And tomorrow on the 12th. So as this records out, the audiobook has now been released of Leading Winning Teams. So super excited about that because most of my friends, Marty, we don't read books anymore. We all listen to them, right? So It's always exciting. I did not read that book myself, but it's a great listen. And of course, most people know me because I spent over 13 years in professional baseball coaching in 3 World Series. That just wrapped up with a Dodgers win. And as we talk about Winners Find a Way, first of all, man, a lot of gratitude, Marty, to the veterans. You were one of those, longtime Navy SEAL. Man, it is a both bittersweet day. We celebrate the freedom in our country on this day, and it's amazing. And man, I'm staggered by the fact that only like 1.5% of our population, adult population, actually served in the military. It's a really small statistic, which surprised me. I thought it was larger. And man, you've been on the front of this thing for a bit, for a hot minute with the SEALs. Talk a little bit about what Veterans Day means to you real quick, Marty.
I guess it hits me on a couple different levels. The first one is the legacy. I've got a lot of friends, a lot of contacts, especially in social media, that we've all linked up. A couple thousand Green Berets, SEALs, Marines. We all kind of gravitated towards each other. And on days like today or Memorial Day, there's a lot of pictures flying around. There are some pretty funny ones. And, military guys are pretty good at cutting each other up with humor. So you post a picture of yourself, you're going to get about 40 different responses.
Yeah.
Especially if it's a picture of you as a young person.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. You got to reignite the camaraderie. You realize it doesn't go away. Even these people that you've never physically and personally met, you're all part of this big group of people that decided to sacrifice. And you see the same thing with firefighters and law enforcement. You get in a room of those kinds of people that you're like, and instantly you know everybody. You're talking in shorthand. It's as if you knew everybody forever because you've all kind of lived the life and you've done the deed. The second thing that I think about is the family legacy. So you mentioned the small percentage of people that join the military. A lot of that's influenced by the history of their family. So my father was in the Navy. My great uncle was in the Navy in World War II. My father was in Korea. My brother was in the Navy. I was in the Navy. My oldest son was in the Air Force. And, not because of any overt pressure on any of us to join the service, it just seemed like, that example of sacrifice, even if it was for just 4 years, was out there for us to think about. And so not everybody in the family went, but a lot of the family members did. And I found, especially today, people posting those generational pictures, of fathers all the way from World War II, all the way to present, and uncles and everything. So that's the second part, that it is an American thing. And when you think about that far back, you say, well, everybody went to war in World War II. Everybody went to war in World War II. So the whole nation was fighting the war. And thank God we haven't had to get into that situation again. But, you also could get this feeling from a day like today and watching it kind of play out, from dawn to dusk, that if we were ever in that situation again, everybody would step up again.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that, Marty. I hope that everybody would step up. And I got to tell you, the fear is real from a guy who's not in the military. I got this probably camaraderie, at least knowledge to it because of the professional baseball thing, right? Very similar in the fact, like people who are in kind of this exclusive group, they come together, you win a championship together, you get together, and it's like you're transported right back to that moment again, right in the middle of the grind, right? And it's special. It's really special. Life or death is not on the line here. I mean, it's important, but it's not life or death. I'm thrilled because, you know, you were a contributor in my book. I used some quotes from your first interview with us when we were discussing, you know, your second book. Today we're discussing the new release of Be Different, your third business book. The first one was Be Nimble, released January 2022. Then in January 2023, you released Be Visionary. Certainly more. The first one, Be Nimble, talking about, you know, leading. And that was such a great book, like the adaptability of it all. And then you go into Visionary, and we're talking about more strategy as a leader, right? We're talking about that. And of course, you have JPH Publishing out of London, great publishing house. You released third book of Be Different. We're now talking more about creativity and innovation. So I'm super excited to dive into that today, but very thankful to you, Marty, that not only are you been a part of my book, but you also were part of my book launch and a live interview, which is really cool to join some fellow people that were not only doing live interviews on their segment, but also some panel discussions, which I love when a lot of great minds come together. Now, what most people don't know about you, this isn't like, hey man, I've written 3 books. You've written 13 books. You've come out with your 10th novel. That's not actually out yet, but you've completed your 10th novel. And man, like, you know, you're a CEO of a medical company. Where do you find the time to write 13 books, my man?
That's becoming kind of the main question in all my interviews. Um,
It's so
you know,
much
you
work.
can do almost any you know, it's, you know, the old African thing, you know, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? Um, if you want to do something and you decide to do it, you make time to do it,
Yeah.
and it's a rational, reasonable amount of time, right? Then all you have to do is just put one day in front of the other, one event in front of the other. And writing for me was I got a lot of good advice, read a lot about it, but I go and I sit down about 5:30 in the morning and I start to write. Usually after I read what I wrote the day before. If I only get a paragraph out and then I can't think of anything worth putting on paper, I just walk away. And the next day I sit down, I read it, and sometimes on that day I'll put 2 pages in. But every day I sit down like a discipline, like brushing my teeth, and I've been doing that for 7 or 8 years now. And it always surprises me. In the beginning, it's always daunting. It's always like, "There's no way I'm gonna write this whole thing." Like this novel
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
finished was 98,000 words. I'm like, "There's no way I'm gonna
Oh,
finish this thing."
yeah. So for
And
people that
it
don't know, a 98,000 word novel, this is things I'm learning from the publishing world. A 98,000 word novel is going to end up well over 300 pages. I mean, this is this
yeah,
is this is serious stuff.
about 340 to 350, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right, 'cause it's mechanical, there's math to it,
Yeah.
there's science to it, and, which is also scary 'cause it's like you wanna build a house and you're just looking at a patch of dirt. You've got the plan, but you can't see how that plan's ever gonna become anything on
Yeah.
that's, you know, plot of dirt. So, yeah, that's the answer to the question. You basically decide to do something, and it can be a metaphor for lots of things, like losing weight, you know? You go out and you walk for 5 minutes every day, and then eventually you walk for 10 every day, and then eventually you walk for 20 every day, and you start losing weight, and you start getting healthier, and it's not something that you're gonna put into a book like, you know, "How I Lost Weight in 412 Years" by by
Yeah,
walking
right. Right.
10
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
10 minutes a day, but
412
it's
years.
your
Yeah.
it's your personal journey, and it worked for you, and the biggest thing was you had a decision, then a discipline following the decision, and a behavior change, and then eventually something changes about you, both
Yeah.
mentally, emotionally, psychologically, and physically.
Well, and I love, you know, I don't know if it's any different for a formula for winning. I tell everybody, you win every day. You gotta go do the work daily to win. Because the wins don't come on like every day, right? Like it's, hey, I want to win 30 days from now. I mean, I love the quote that says, you know, everyone wants to win the day of the game, few are willing to prepare for it, right? And man,
Right.
you know, your background in the SEALs, like you guys did so much work on prep, right? You're prepping because it's life or death, and it's going to be we have to win when it's go to when it is absolute go time. We got to win. Like losing is not an option, failure is not an option. So the prep is a big deal about how well you can get ready. Is that fair?
You nailed it. It's they call it standard operating procedures in the military. So you train your mind and your body with all the basic functions of the job. You become essentially a tactical fighter, a war fighter, what they call an operator in the business. But the reason you do that is because you know that when you actually have to go to do the job, almost nothing is going to be the way everybody says it's going to be.
Yeah.
I mean, the way to give you an example is you train for football, you train to play a football game, and they drop you in the middle of a cricket field or a
Yeah.
baseball field, and you're supposed to win. So now you're
That's,
falling back on your basic physicality, your
yeah.
basic discipline systems. Are you coachable?
Fundamentals.
Can you follow? Can you lead? Are you a game player? You see space and time and distance, and that's how it is in combat. You get in there, and they said there's going to be 5 guys. It's 15 guys. They said there weren't going to be dogs. There's dogs. They said they're going to drop you, a mile away. They dropped you 10 miles away, and then it becomes a pickup game of fill in the blank. But you're relying on a team of people that individually have been preparing themselves, and they know that the standard operating procedure is to gel and work and flow, whatever that flow is requiring.
I love that analogy, because I think about being dropped into a cricket field. Like, I don't know the rules. I don't know, and everyone's like, hey, you'd probably be pretty good at that because you have hand-eye coordination, right? Baseball,
Mm.
right? I get it. I should be, but I don't know how the game's played, man. All of a sudden it's like hyper learning, right? 400 level, because how fast can you learn and adapt is a big deal. Now, I love your position of like, hey, we got a plan. So let's talk about how we recruit, like you recruit as a CEO, I recruit into my organization, someone who looks at that house plan and goes, oh, I've done 5,000 of these. I know exactly how this is. Just like if you saw a military operation, you might see it and go, oh, I think I know how we want to attack that. I'd look at it and go, hey, who brought the Latin schematic? Because I don't speak the language, right? Like, I don't know how we're going to do this. So we have people that absolutely got a much better head start on how to get that. But we can all learn this. But we can all learn the skill set, right?
Right. And your emotional maturity, your intellectual resiliency, all these things are born of training for the game. But when you're faced with something that's not exactly what you trained for, you adapt and overcome and you excel. And then you walk away and you learn from that, and then you do it again and again and again. You learn more sometimes from the things that represent adversity and a difference from what you plan to do than when you go and execute a perfect plan perfectly.
So for people who don't know, they might want to go back and watch episode 77 where we introduced you to the show, Marty. And we talk about, how you're a guy who's headed into the Navy to be, an air traffic controller. And they give you hey, I don't know if you know or not, here's your orders and you're going to be a SEAL. And you're like, wait a minute. So, I mean, you're a deep thinker. You've written 13 books. When I think about a lot of the SEALs, I always see them, Jocko and all the boys, like it's physical. They look physical. You can't hurt me. David Goggins, who's talking very much about the mental, but the physical stuff he's putting through his body is crazy. Do you find like the writing has been therapeutic for a deep thinker like yourself? Has that been really valuable to you?
It has. It has. It's very cathartic, mainly because it hasn't had anything to do with my vocation, which has been growing and leading companies for the last 15 years as a CEO. That's, dealing with lawyers and HR and standard marketing issues and the, strategy, kind of small scale strategy, market penetration strategies, not really large scale visionary strategies. And when I sit down and I write, I don't think about any of that. I just kind of let my creativity flow. It becomes a channel for my creativity. And when I go to work, what I basically have to do is I have to go on receive mode. My job, if I've done my job well in either building a team or acquiring a team over time, my job is to be the resource partner, not to be running around giving orders and shouting commands and handing arm signals. If I'm doing that, then I don't have a good group below me. I've screwed up
That's right.
somehow. A good leader is invisible until the moment of chaos or crisis when they have to step up. And that's because they have the authority to do something completely out of the ordinary. Reinvent the org chart, change the direction of the company, shut down a product, start up a new product. If you have to do all those things like people had to do after the beginning of COVID, that's leadership. Leadership is is acting in, the fog of war, the chaos of business. Managing is when everything is going smooth. Managing is the processes are working, the systems are working, the people are actually executing according to their resume. And once in a while, you have an issue, and you have a manual that tells you this is what you do when this issue happens. That's managing. It's a sustainment function. A lot of managers, most managers have been trained to lead, and therefore, when something goes completely off the rails, they lose a major supplier. They lose a key talent. Their top salesperson or something. They don't know how to cope with it, and that's because nobody's trained them, nobody's prepared them, and so I, to me, leadership is kicking back and watching everything kind of move around and being available for those moments, large and small, and there's only creativity required there is if there's a true crisis. Otherwise, I'm basically just I'm kind of like an angel on their shoulder. I'm just there in case they need me. So
Mm.
two totally different ways of dealing with my world, normal workday and pre-workday writing.
Let's talk a little bit about, before we dive into Be Different, which I'm super excited to talk about. Answer me this one, as we talk about 10 fiction novels and 3 nonfiction works now with your newest Be Different. Do you like writing one over the other? Do you find yourself in a different mindset doing both? Walk me through it.
I definitely enjoy writing the fiction a lot more. Yeah, and you'll get this because you've written books. You sit down, and I've helped other guys who wanted to write a book, who were afraid to write a book, get over that threshold, and they've now been published and everything. The question is, you don't think, or the dilemma is, you sit there and you don't think anybody's going to care about what you have to say. And you also realize that everything that you say is going to be written down forever, and then it's just you're putting it out there, right? Like I made the comment early in this interview. Like today, I posted a picture of me at 17 as my boot camp graduation picture, and I look like I'm 11 years old. And I haven't gone back to see the reams of commentary.
Yeah, right.
Because I look like I'm 11 years old. So it's kind of like putting yourself out there. You're in business books, you're saying, this is how I think the world works. This is how I think human beings work. And this is how I think you could benefit by doing these things, right? And you've got to have a little bit of confidence that you have something to say. And you have to have a little confidence that you're competent to say things. And I always tell people that are asking me if they should write it, I said, well, are you writing it to be a millionaire, or are you writing it because you think it's important to get it down on paper? And they always say the second thing. I go, all right, so how many readers of your book would make you feel successful? How many people that took that in and acted on it? 1, 2, 3, 4? And they said, well, if one person emailed me and said, this changed my world, and I said, so you're writing for an audience of 1. And if you get 1 person, you're a superstar.
Yeah.
That gets you over that hump. You don't have that with fiction.
Yeah.
With fiction, I can add a character, and I can decide they're tall, short, fat, dumb, super smart. I mean, I can do anything I want, full flexibility. And who's going to tell me, no, you shouldn't have made that guy that way? It's fiction.
Yeah. So when you wrote your fiction novels, you didn't write it under Marty Strong. You wrote it under a different name, right?
M.L. Strong. Yeah.
M.L. Strong. Okay. So are you doing the 10th novel under M.L. Strong?
No, I'm doing that under Marty Strong. The first 9 novels, all the proceeds go to the SEAL Veterans Foundation.
Yep.
So I've been donating since the first one was published, and I wrote M.L. Strong. I don't know. I've never really liked my first name very much, but then when I went to write the business books, I decided to make the distinction. And anyway.
Well, listen, man, I never liked my first name. Hope it's not a family legacy name, first of all, Marty. Like, is it Martin?
No,
is it short?
It is Martin. It's Martin, but it rhymes with all kinds of things.
Well, maybe we need to get you over to London so you could be like Sir Martin or something like that. Get your knighthood or something. And Sir Martin Strong. So
yeah,
I like Marty.
I have 5 kids. I named my 2 boys cool names like Nick and Mike. All my friends are like Nick, Mike, Mark, all that stuff, and I was Marty.
Yeah, but Marty's, hey, be different. There's not a lot of Martys running around, man.
There you go. It was different.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's dive into that. Like, first of all, for everybody out there, go pick up the series is called ML Strong. That's the author. The series is called what, Marty?
There's 2 series. One is called The Time Warrior Sagas. That's a
Yep.
sci-fi time travel, and the other series is called Seal Strike, and that's
Seal
5
Strike.
books. That's all about seals.
Love it. I mean, for all of you enthusiasts, I mean, the SEALs have obviously taken on a life of their own. So proud as a nation of that organization, of our military. And what better on Veterans Day than to go out, pick up Marty's series, and a portion of it's going to go to the SEAL Veterans Association. So, I mean, that's a huge win, 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 win all around. You win, you get a great novel. Marty wins. He wrote a great book, and you're going to really enjoy it. And of course, the Veterans Association for the SEALs is going to win. So that's awesome. So pick that up. Let's talk about Be Different. You start out with Be Nimble on, leadership, and leading with adaptability, all the things you've learned in your world, right? Of how important it is to be able to be nimble. I think adaptability is one of those huge idiots that we're not doing enough to train people up in. And in sports, we have to be trained in it. And it's not only, and you'll appreciate this in the military, being able to do other things is great, but being to adapt and execute on them is a whole nother thing. It's like, oh, well, hey, we got this new skill for you. You have 8-10 weeks. In the military, you might have 8 or 10 hours, you might have 8 or 10 minutes. In our world, it might be 8 or 10 seconds and the next pitch is coming and you got to execute on that skill that you haven't done for 2 years or maybe 10, because you have a 23-year-old home run hitter who hasn't bunted since they were 13 years old. And they're like, well, it's the World Series, Marty. Now we need you to bunt. And you're like, I don't work on that skill a lot. Like, well, welcome to adaptability, right? And so,
Right.
so be nimble. You start out there. Be visionary as we work in the strategy and all the strategic thinking and how we're, looking forward and shaping our future, and then the strategy. I always talk about this. I'd love to talk about how you did this in your book. I always talk about the future reality and the current reality, right? And our vision, we see that future reality, but here's our current reality, and we got to figure out, hey, how do we get to the future reality? What are the steps? And so we're diving into that strategy to gap that up and shrink that gap and go to our future reality. How do you direct that in Be Visionary?
So there's kind of a natural progression in the 3 books. In the first book, you hit the nail on the head. Adaptability is something that can be taught. It can be learned. It should be a prerequisite for anybody that's in a quote unquote leadership position. And then it's not. And not only do leaders have to learn adaptability, the followers need to learn adaptability. It has to be kind
Yeah.
of a culture of flexibility, adaptability, a willingness to understand that the universe is going to change things on you. And instead of crying and complaining about the fact that things have changed, you just basically roll your sleeves up and look at the guys in charge and say, what are we going to do? And
Yeah.
if it's, hey, I need your ideas. Okay, here's my ideas. It's got to be a willingness to pitch in and to throw everything in the pot and see what comes out, right? So
Yep.
it's a holistic thing. In the first book, I talked a little bit about vision related to strategy development, and a bunch of my beta readers said you need to write a whole book on strategy because it's not taught anywhere either. So crisis leadership isn't taught in college. It's not taught in most companies. And I was just surprised that these guys were all CEOs, Harvard guys, and yeah, they don't teach it. They don't teach it in the B schools. They don't teach it in most of the companies these guys had worked for. And they said, and actually, in me commenting on the first book about strategy, they realized that they were falling short in their own organizations where they were the CEO. They weren't training the next generation to think, beyond the next horizon, to push the what if out 24, 36 months, and to contemplate opportunities, not just threats. So I wrote the second book because of that, because there seemed to be a gap. And it starts out with basically the way Be Different does. It's, hey, it's okay to dream. It's okay to think big thoughts. It's okay to express those things. You don't have to be a switched on robot all the time and act like, you only know and only appreciate the rules and the regulations and the way the football play or whatever that everybody's following. Once in a while, you can raise your hand and say, well, what if we did this or what if we did that? Well, that starts to segue into you need courage to do that, but you also need to functionally know how to do that. So be different is basically how do you functionally free up your mind, kind of relearn how to do what you used to do naturally as a younger adult or younger child, and then apply it so that you get great insights and great thoughts, and you can be more productive on a larger, kind of grander scale for yourself, your family, and your organization. And then how do you convert that into something practical? Be visionary talks about all of that in the beginning, but then teaches you how to actually build a team within your organization to create these visions and then convert them into workable strategies and then back plan an operational plan with milestones from that strategy. And even to use the naysayers as a red team to attack the plan, to try to find holes and problems with it, rather than tossing them out because they don't want to get on the vision train. No, use them. That's a good person to have. It's like having somebody to spar against that's a completely wild style that you're not used to.
Yeah.
So they all kind of progressively lead into each other. Not that it was planned that way, but they have.
Love it. So, I mean, I think when you talk about your beta and they get this feedback, I mean, it's a little bit alarming when I see ads out there, people calling me about, hey, there's a CEO role. Would you be interested in this? And I'm like, man, and then they go, well, you don't have an MBA. And I'm like, they don't teach this stuff in MBAs. Like, you got to go get it. You got to go get like in the experience now, because most of my MBA guys who have worked for me, men and women, they didn't have adaptability training. They didn't have like this visionary work. They struggle with this stuff still because, I think confidence is back to prep and reps, right? Getting prepared for what's about to happen. And then you got to do the reps of like, man, I thought this was going to happen. That's not what happened. Like, and you got to get those reps to learn like, hey, what you think is going to happen may not happen. And when it does, then what do you do? Then what do you do? And you get that over time. You start developing and start seeing different intricacies, knowing how this thing's going to flow. And man, that was your guys' whole life down on, in the front line of, hey, we start looking for key things that are going to give us indicators of how this thing may go. And we've seen it before now. We've seen a couple things before now. And we're taking all those experiences and we're shaping them in. And I think that's part of the problem of the MBA, especially for the kids who go with no work experience. Like, oh, let's go get an MBA. I just graduated from school. Now I got no real world experience. So it's all just text learning. Is that fair?
It is. I mean, the MBA was designed, I think it was in the late 50s, early 60s, because the corporations in the United States were getting massive. They were all copying the structure of the U.S. Army. Coming out of World War II, the U.S. Army was the world's greatest example of mass everything, mass global communications, mass global transportation, mass global manufacturing production. And they copied that. They copied the architecture. They copied the structure, the org charts. But they didn't have anybody that could work in all the different silos in that type of org chart. See, the Army builds those people, from scratch. And so they can populate those things. Commercial America didn't have that. So the MBA was really kind of this idea where, what if we put them through a program where they learn about all the different silos? They learn the 6 or 7 or 8 different categories or functional areas of business. They're not going to be expert in any of them. They're not going to come out as an accountant, but they're going to know enough that when you put them into one of these organizations, they can now be trained and go through OJT experiential kind of I guess, grooming. And eventually they'll start to get the gist of the whole organization. The problem is, if the MBA programs of today are still following that mission statement, they're following the mission statement to try to train people for an org structure and a method of producing and a method of running businesses that's as old as the dinosaurs now. Nobody's doing that. That's why when you tell somebody, COVID or not, I want to run a virtual team, I want a virtual organization, and anybody above a certain age or with a certain level of degrees, they start freaking out because it's not part of the pattern. It's not part of the book. It's not part of what they were taught. And it's just insane. I use all kinds of examples and metaphors to try to crack people out of this. I'll say, so everything you were taught in your MBA program, you believe was sound. Yes. And when did you go through MBA program? 2001. Okay. So has anything changed in the world since 2001? Well, so they used to have these things called encyclopedias. So if you had the Encyclopedia Britannica and you bought it in 1997 and you had it up on the shelves and it's 2024, and every time you had a question, would you go to ChatGPT or Google, or would you go over there to the 1997 edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica to find out what
Yeah.
the capital of it'd all be wrong? 80% of the information, which was perfectly accurate, 87% of it or 85% of it would be absolutely wrong. That's because information and reality is perishable. And if you think that you're going to anchor your self-esteem and your intellectual position of perfection around something that happened in 2001 or an experience of learning in 2003, or you're in a business where an event happened and you dealt with it in 2017, and now all events going forward are all going to be handled the same way because they'll all be the same events. You're living in la la world, man. I mean, that's why the degrees don't have the applicability they used to have. They're kind of missing the point of the current constant flowing and intersecting and changing environment of business and life. It's a different universe.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, and I think the good universities who've really figured that out have changed their learning style. It is adaptive. It is, sinking them into getting in things real world, real time, actually do the work, execute on the work and find out. Because book learning, I mean, we've seen I actually have it in my book, the learning scale of how we learn. And our universities are still on this lecture, which is like 5% information retained. Like, it's terrible, right? It's like the lowest amount of retention in our education at all time, right? And I like to tell people, Marty, you'll appreciate this. I'll know you know it when you can teach it. And so when you go out there and go, hey, we're going to work on this complex thing, and you got your soldier team out there and they go, okay, I got it. Oh, sergeant, major, whatever, I got it. I'm like, okay, teach it to this guy. Like, oh, wait a minute. Well, I'm not sure. Like, yeah, right. Hold on, man. Like, and so I think there's that whole other level there. But let's jump into because I do find myself in this category of what I call, and I don't know if we coined this at my former company, Leading with Courage Academy, but I kind of find myself as an astute generalist. Like, I'm no expert in anything, man, anymore. I mean, I feel like I know a bunch of information about a lot of things, but never an expert in anybody, which kind of makes me that jack of all trades, master of none, right? But probably leadership. Probably I know a little bit more about that probably than most. But like, I feel like an astute generalist, and I'm always ready that information's coming so fast, and hyper learning has been the key element to me to getting ahead. So when we talk about, I want to jump into this be different, because I really, man, I embraced this as a kid. I wanted to be different. I wanted to be something that wasn't everybody else. I like the fact that nobody else had my name. I was not John, where, hey, there's 17 in my class, right? It was Trent. There was no other Trents. In fact, people called me Darby because Terrence Trent D'Arby, you remember that artist, right? He was like the only Trent people knew back in the day. There was like a song, Wishing Well came out, right? And so I like that. I like the fact that I wasn't like, and I had the courage to be different. I didn't drink alcohol when most kids did. Like, I just didn't think it was important to me. I had different visions. I had different goals for myself. It wasn't something that important, and it didn't make me feel good, quite frankly. So, but a lot of people associate with different as strange, ostracized. You said something really good in the pre-call and describe how you said, be different used to be looked at.
It used to be you were considered odd.
Yep.
Because you weren't mainstream in either your behaviors or the way you dressed or the way you spoke or the way you thought.
Yep.
And be different really focuses on the way you think. It's not really it's not a testimony against laws and regulations that keep us safe and all that. It's it's not really, it's more about being able to express yourself intellectually in a way that frees up the way your brain was actually designed to work, which is to free reel and flow and to pick up all kinds of information from any and all sources, all your senses and all inputs, and then kind of absorb all that and let the brain's internal kind of mechanical critical analysis and thinking methodology do its thing. The brain wasn't originally designed for you to try to pattern match. It wasn't like, okay, I've got to find the thing I was told this was about or the way I was learned, and I got to match, I've got to find it like it's a Jeopardy question. That's not the way the
Mm,
brain was originally. Originally, the brain was all about absorbing the universe and the environment so you could stay alive. That is, stay alive to look for threats, and staying alive to look for friends, and staying alive to look for food. And again, we've kind of distorted the way the brain's designed by thinking that that odd person over there that sees and understands something in a different way from what we're all doing normally together, because we're all doing what we were told to do. I mean, a perfect example is there are math people that get to math solutions, kids, and they have the answer right every time. And they're chastised and told, no, you have to get at it this way. This is the only way you can do it. This is the way we're
yeah.
teaching it. This is the 4-step
You
process.
yeah. You didn't write it out, Johnny. So that can't be right. Well, I came up with the answer. Like,
Right.
I think that's yeah, I think that's always been the challenge of the kids that are super intelligent who go, I don't need to write it out. Like I already
Yeah.
did
So
this,
so let's
right?
let's hammer that out of the guy. I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me. But
Yeah.
education in America is a lot of what I had to write about, because education in America came from European education, and the goals of education in the United States initially for public learning was more about creating semi-literate voters and semi-literate workers. And
Semi.
it
I like
wasn't
that.
it
I like
wasn't
that word
well,
semi.
I mean, it's just enough. Nobody thought that they had to learn the Greek and Roman classics or speak Latin or any of those kind of highfalutin, lofty objectives. They were just supposed it was supposed to give the United States a population of citizens that could perform as citizens in their function of voting and have some idea of what they were voting for and why. And the other part was we needed workers that could read instructions. We needed workers that could be taught and trained. And most of back in the when public schools became the thing at the turn of the 19th century, most people worked in farms. They worked, they didn't have anything to do with machinery. They didn't have anything to do with
Yeah.
complex human hierarchies and organizations. So that that odd person that was out there that maybe was ostracized, they were different, they were strange. I mean, I wasn't enlightened in those days. I probably went right along with the flow of the culture and the clique and everything in school. Yeah, that's an odd person over there. I don't want to hang out with that person.
Mm,
I've since learned that I was participating in what we've all been subjected to, which is a constant pressure to conform, a constant pressure to comply, and a constant pressure to obey in the way we learn and the way we think, with a
yeah.
justifiable goal, quote unquote, of getting us, off the farm and into a modern work environment. And then when you get there, they don't ask you what your ideas are either.
Well,
You know,
one of the things is we talk about brain function. Like, let's talk about these two concepts of brain function that you mentioned in the book, right? I mean, first of all, from what I know, again, astute generalist talking, is that we have all these people that are brilliant brain surgeons, and the knowledge of the brain, I heard at max capacity, knowledge wise, we know about 15 or 20% about brain function. Like we do not know. This is like this. This is like the most limited knowledge of the human body that we know. Like we know a bunch of things about the function of the human body, physiologically, medically. We've advanced tons of places. The human brain has not advanced so much. But you talk about two brain functions in this, being the focus and task function, and then that exploratory switch. Walk us through a little bit about that, about what you learned.
sure. So I'm on a board of a group called Best Robotics. They've been around for 31 years. They were started by two Texas Instruments engineers, and the point of it was to try to teach or inspire kids in the 6th through 12th grade to want to get into technology, mathematics, things like that. And there is a robotics competition, and they've got to build companies and all the stuff around it. But when I was asked to come in and work on their strategy, at their 30th anniversary, I eventually was pulled into the board. I'm still serving on that board. And I would go to the competition and I'd watch what was happening. And I made some comments about what I thought was happening, which was not teaching STEM. There was no teaching at all. And the engineers running the competitions agreed with me. Yeah, there's no adults telling them what to do. All these teams of 15, 17, 18 kids to a team, they're filling these arenas with thousands of people, and they're going out there and they're competing and coming back, and there's no adults intervening. And everybody shows up with a different robot. They're all given the challenge task. They have 8 weeks to prepare for it, and they've all solved the problem with a different design. It's not a kit, right? It's also a testament that nobody's teaching them, because if somebody's teaching them, they'd be teaching them classic engineering, classic robotics, classic, and they'd all come out looking kind of like the same.
That's right.
So it's a really,
Step 1 through 20 is pretty standard for us, right? Like,
yeah,
let's get it in a manual and follow the manual.
yeah. So it was a physical and dramatic expression of freedom of creativity and thought. And then they were allowed to innovate in between the cycles of the competition. There's about 10 rounds. They can come back and they do rapid prototyping. They've got tables and Dremel tools and stuff, and they fix whatever it is they think they observed, and they correct it, and they get back out there. And I was just stunned, right? So I got involved in another project called Best Mind Lab that we created, and we started interviewing brain scientists and brain experts from around the world, both educators and actual clinical scientists that study the brain. And a couple things came out of that. One, there was a long study that showed that given a creativity test, that 6-year-olds were scoring in the high 90th percentile. And then that test was given to 14-year-olds. They were in the 75 percentile. I mean, their level of creativity. And then they were given it to people in their late 20s, and they were around 40%. And they gave them to 40-year-olds, and they were around 5%. But the study, thinking that there wouldn't be that much of a dramatic drop, tried to figure out why. And what it came up with was what we've already been talking about. The institution of learning and institutions of culture, social circles, parents, brothers, sisters, friends, just hammered the hell out of their creativity until it just dropped off. They forgot how to do it. And it had nothing to do with their physical. They didn't go through puberty and suddenly lose their creativity. There was no mechanical, biological reason for it. Well, you take that, and then you take what you were mentioning, the fact that brain science has advanced considerably. And believe it or not, the special operations community has a lot to do with it. There's a lot of guys that have gone through brain studies because of traumatic brain injury. And when they get in there, they start learning all these different functions of the brain and how the brain rewires around injuries and does different things. Well, part of this research came up with 2 kind of primal parts of the brain that function as a survival mechanism. They go all the way back to the beginning of mankind. And one is this task function capability. It's basically like a switch. You turn it on and off. So what I mean turn it on is your primary mental focus is to execute a special task or a series of tasks. And I mentioned earlier, thread a needle, take the needle, sew clothes, build a fire, do things that are very practical and very finite, and you have to focus your attention. And then the other switch is called the forager, which means to go look for food, or the explorer switch. And that was required because if you didn't have something like that, their fear of the unknown in the next valley or over the next mountain or across the river would cause them to starve to death, because eventually they would hunt out and eat all the nuts and berries and food available, and they would die. So they had to take a leap of faith. They had to go someplace they didn't understand. And that meant they had to be willing to explore the unknown. And to do that, you have to open your mind and you have to be prepared for things. And then they would find the next valley, and then they would settle down, and then they'd switch back to the functional task focus switch. What they determined was different study than the one I mentioned earlier, but almost the same results. That for some reason, in all the test people that they were running through the program, the younger ones were more capable of showing a switch back and forth in the brain function. But as they got older, they stopped being able to do it. Like they forgot how to do it. It wasn't a mechanical, physical injury or anything like that prevented it.
Hmm.
Now, what that meant to me was that if you don't have any kind of medical condition, there's no age limit on thinking like a 6-year-old from the standpoint of creativity, a sense of awe, a sense of wonder, a sense of open-mindedness, which if that's true, then you have to unteach rather than teach creativity. You have to unteach get rid of all the baggage, get rid of all that conformity, and make it clear to everybody. First they have to understand they have a problem, and secondly, they have to figure out a way to ignore the impulses to not want to think that way. It's actually a better training scenario. You're not teaching them how to do something, you're teaching them how to undo something.
Do you think I'm a grandfather, right? And getting down on the floor with my 2-year-old grandson is a whole new world of what he sees from that level, what he's getting into, why he wants to do what he wants to do. And I'm just a follower. Like, I let him kind of create the deal, right? And I've got my ideas, and his ideas are never mine, right? And so it's interesting, like you said, going back to a 6-year-old of, man, I felt like when we were that age, it was constant adaptability. Learn how to climb the tree, learn how to do this, learn how to get the garage fixed, learn how to, build something, learn how to build a toy, learn how to manufacture something in your mind to play, like just organized, not unorganized social play of house or sports star or creating stuff. This is right back to us in our backyard, envisioning ourselves running for the touchdown in the Super Bowl, like in our games with only 3 people. This is not a Super Bowl. We are not pro athletes, but in our mind, we're making this out to be a bigger thing, and we're creating something. And the mind's a powerful thing. How are we losing it? How are we, getting this 20s, and then all of a sudden it's this mass decline of stimulation, innovation, creativity? Is it because we're, you kind of talked about before, like, well, there's got to be linear. Where's the manual for the 20 steps? Where's this? Because we've been conditioned into that, or what? How are we losing it? How are we losing that function?
Well, up to a certain age, I think we've gotten worse instead of better. I've got 5 grandkids too, and there's jokes that flash around on social media where they show a black and white picture of a bunch, like 5 or 6 kids on Schwinn bikes from 1965. And I said, remember when you were gone all day and your parents thought you were sleeping over or something, and you were actually 10 miles away crawling through the brand new sewer system they built,
Yeah.
or building a fort or digging
Yeah.
caves. Or when I grew up, 2 things. One, you weren't allowed in the house and you weren't allowed to watch TV without permission. So you were get out of the house and go. So you had to use your imagination.
Yeah.
You had to come up with stuff, like you said. You had to do buzzer shots for that's the
Yeah.
final shot in the NBA championships. You put your
Yeah.
toe on the edge of a crack in the concrete, and it was the impossible football catch as you were leaning forward, to save the, you did all
Foot
that
in
stuff, right?
bounds. My feet are in
Yeah,
bounds.
you did that. And
Yeah.
if you saw a movie or something, you went and you played it out in dirt fields, and you did all kinds of stuff. And if you failed, like at riding a bike, you suffered the consequences of failure, and your learning was informed by that. And in all areas of your life as a child. Well, now a lot of that's been taken away. A lot of kids don't get dirty. A lot of kids don't climb that tree. They're not allowed to. No kids are going out there with their bicycles and building ramps that see if they can jump a stream. In general, maybe in some places in the United States, but in general, that is not the way kids are being raised, which means I think it's gotten worse because the society informs and tells the adults how to act, and the adults then become parents, and they turn and put that normalcy burden on their kids. So it may be that older people now, 45 years and older, may actually be maybe easier to get them to go back to thinking in a more open-minded, creative manner than it will be for the generations in their 20s right now, because they've had a contained life and a structured life and a focused life for so long. Um, Yeah, I mean, but it could be worse. I have a friend who's in India, and he runs all kinds of incubation projects and everything. And he said the problem in India is that the Indian government's put out all this money for inventions, and nobody shows up to get the money because nobody's putting together inventions because nobody in India is taught how to invent something new. They're taught in schools. They're taught how to do exactly what they're supposed to
Yeah.
do. They're taught the history of everything in the world, the history of
Yep.
math, the history of medicine, history of engineering. And he said the money just sits there. So now he's trying to figure out a way. How do you get kids to want to take a risk and make a mistake on paper and have it rejected? Even come up with an idea. They overkilled. He said they tried to make their schools so good that they overkilled and kind of completely obliterated this risk taking factor. So
Yeah, it's interesting because you get information overload, right? Like just know the facts, know the playbook, know this, just memorize and know it. And it's information is power. We've been taught a lot of that. Um, and I talked a little bit with David Morehouse, currently running strategy for the Pittsburgh Steelers and used to be the president of the Penguins. And he talked about being the helicopter parent. He's like, man, when I was a kid, you ride your bike to confirmation when you're 13 years old and you got to go for 8 weeks. And I got on my bike at night and it's the winter time and I got to go 13 blocks and I must have had to make 1,000 decisions. Like, hey, don't go down that street. That street's no good. You might get in trouble down there. Watch the light, crosswalks. What am I going to do? All these things. Be on time. And he's like, man, our kids don't make those decisions. We're like literally limiting them from decisions because there's a path and you're supposed to go this path and think somewhat linearly and it's crazy. They're not tested in any way. It feels like. How do you see it?
well, you're right. They're not challenged. They're not faced with abnormal. Now take that population and moving forward to make them quote unquote managers and businesses, and something goes wrong. Something odd happens, something strange happens, something unexpected happens. Where did they build up any kind of scar tissue or even brain matter to handle that? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why people talk about people melting down when they're faced with adversity. Uh, that's a real thing because they haven't been taught how to do this. And you can teach
Yeah.
people how to do this. You can do scenario driven training. You could expose them to all of what I mentioned earlier, the failure of main supplier. You can get them in a room and you can storyboard out and you can say, okay, you 10 people are in this room. I got 10 people in the other room. We just lost ABC Corp as our primary client. It's 49% of our revenue. How are we going to handle it? You got 8 hours to come up with the solution. How are we going to fix the strategy? What are we going to do? All soup to nuts. They do the same thing in the other room, and then they bring them all together and they compare the crazy stuff they came up with. He said, the problem is when you do that, it takes so long to blow them off the conformity mindset that they immediately just go back to the playbook, the way we do it now. We'll tweak this little. That's a management answer to that. No,
Yeah.
you guys are going to fail. So you have to have somebody who's smart to be in there to kind of proctor it. And sometimes you can toss in other assumptions that they think they have a Band-Aid on it, but it's really only a Band-Aid. But the more you do those drills, the more you learn how life works and the universe works, which is business. You're talking about MBAs. Most MBAs are not in most companies. There's only a small number of companies that can afford MBAs at all. The vast majority of companies in the United States are small and mid-sized companies. So that's where all these things are happening. That's where all these decision points are occurring. So I think it's very vital that you learn how to think big, you learn how to lead in crisis, but you also have to understand that the only way you're going to be able to handle what you don't know is coming your way is you have to be creative and innovative as a mindset. And you know, I'm a big believer in flow. You learn all the basics, you get really good physically and mentally. And I mentioned it earlier as a CEO, and you just kind of wait for the world to happen. And then you apply the principles, but you flow with the information, you suck everything up you can, and then you kind of flow into what seems to be a natural way to deal with it. You don't try to hammer anything into any mold at all. It's a waste of time.
Do you think there's a reason for the popularity of these escape rooms?
I haven't read anything about people coming out and saying what they might have learned from it. But with Best Mind Lab, we were actually thinking of using an escape room type approach to doing what we were talking about here, for corporate leaders. Put them in a
Yeah.
room, and basically there's clues, and there's lack of information, but you still have to execute.
Yeah.
Now you think about it, in the information age, starting in the late 1990s, everybody said, "Oh, it's the information age," and people would sit there and look at you and say, "Well, unless I have the information, I don't have to do anything. I'm
Well,
waiting for the information." Well, okay, you do have to do something because we're failing, or we're losing, or we're drowning, or the
yeah.
ship's about to hit a rock. You're not going to get any information, so go. And they stare at you because they've been taught, so the old analysis by paralysis,
Yeah.
or paralysis by
Well,
analysis. I'm sorry.
yeah. I think this is the fear of like knocking the grid out. When people lose information, then what do? Like they're gonna be like panic in the streets because what if I do if I don't have Google? Like, well, and like, you gotta start making decisions, right? You gotta start actually using your skill set.
Yeah.
If you let's talk about first of
There's
all,
always the
everybody,
night.
go ahead.
I was gonna say there's always the 1997 copy of the Encyclopedia Britannica. You can you go find that, see if you can figure something out.
Man, if you got to go back to that because that's your only information, I guess it's something. But like, so let's talk. Let's to wrap things up here, Marty. Thank you so much for being on the show, man. Always love having you, man. I'm so excited about Be Different. Everybody, go out there and get it. It's going to be available on all the major networks, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, everything on December 1st, 2024. Be Different by Marty Strong. Check it out. To finish, you got folks that are in challenge right now. They are not adapting well. What would you tell someone who's not winning today? They feel like they're losing. I always use the quote, winners when shown data that they're losing, find a way to win. And so that adaptability is a big deal of why I surround myself with people like Marty Strong and people in my network that do this really well. What would you tell somebody today who's not winning?
I'd say, well, three things. You have basically three outreach channels that can help you. One is read everything you can, like the books you put out, the books I put out, that give you case studies and explain what's happening and why your brain is acting the way it is. So you become sensitive to it, and you start to understand why your nature is the way it is. And don't stop reading books like that. Try to find as many books as you can. Look at what people are saying about books being motivating or moving or life changing, et cetera, and find those books and read them or listen to them. The second thing is find people, like you mentioned, that seem to have a good sense of humor, seem to be open minded, are also reading and studying and learning all the time. So they're not a static entity. And use them. Ask them questions. Try to find some quality time with them and throw your ideas or your questions at them without being concerned about whether they're going to laugh or poo-poo your point of view, because that'll help you flex that part of your mind that needs confidence. And you'll get good feedback, and you'll find over time you'll end up doing that for somebody else once you kind of get into the flow of the whole thing. And the third thing is, I'm a big believer in biographies. Try to find biographies. It doesn't have to be business people. It can be political leaders. It could be uh, governmental leaders from an older period, or it can be business leaders. When I read those books, it's like I'm listening to somebody tell me their story, what they did wrong, what they did right, their failures, their successes, and usually in a good biography, it covers the whole gambit. You can have a super successful business person becomes a gazillionaire and lost two kids to some disease, and then ends up becoming an alcoholic, and then comes overcoming the alcoholism.
Yep.
There's the whole mix of humanity and human experience in a biography. And every single time I read a biography, the last time I read was Elon. Um, every single time I walk away with some new appreciation or understanding of either human nature or my nature. So those are the three channels: mentor friendships of enlightened people, books about how to enlighten yourself and to think differently. And the third one is to read biographies so that you can learn vicariously through other people's lives.
Love it. For everybody, Winners Find a Way every Thursday, 10 a.m. live Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific on my LinkedIn Live, Leadershipity YouTube channel, and Facebook Live. Check it out. All our podcasts drop Friday mornings on all the major networks. You will catch out Marty Strong's next episode, our second special Veterans Day. Big shout out to Marty and Be Different, his new book coming out December 1st. 2024. Pick it up. Pick up my book, Leading Winning Teams. Pick up the audiobook that just released November 12th. All sorts of exciting stuff. And winners find a way.